Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Parent Advisory Council. So I've got a little echo. I want to figure out who that is and mute them. There we go. That seems better. Welcome, everyone, to the Parents Advisory Council. Thanks for taking some time out of your busy days to provide us some feedback and information. We have a full agenda for you today to cover, but I do think that we'll have some time toward the end of the meeting. I know that Judah sent out a message asking about how the agendas were constructed for these meetings, and we can talk about the process that's been in place for that, and if that's working for us or if we want to make changes to it. So we can talk about that, and then hopefully have some time at the end just for some discussion as well. Just as a couple of quick updates on things that I think parents are really interested in, one of which would be House Bill 208 that passed over to the Senate and then back to the House, and then the governor signed. House Bill 208 establishes really this into law the system of attendance and NTI, non-traditional instruction that schools have been operating with for this school year. So it allows for schools to continue to serve kids in NTI, but it did put an end date to that. So it created an expectation for schools that starting March 29th, so at the end of this month, school districts have to offer for any student who wishes it at least 2 days a week of in-person instruction, and that schools had to be open for in-person instruction 4 days a week. So if you're a school district that's offering 4 or 5 days a week of in-person instruction, that certainly meets it. But the minimum would be one of those hybrid models where students are kind of in Monday and Wednesday or Tuesday and Thursday and then off Friday. That model would be the minimum that would work. So we expect to see most of the districts in the state are already meeting that level. We've got a few districts that have not been in person yet that are going to have to figure out how to pull this together over the next few weeks. But that's a major policy shift that we saw with House Bill 208. The bill does allow for students who request to continue in a virtual environment. They can do that, so it doesn't force students back into an in-person setting. But we were supportive of the bill. We thought that the Department of Education was supportive of House Bill 208. We thought that the expectations around returning to in-person learning were reasonable, appropriate, given sort of where we are in managing COVID. And it included the continuation of a lot of the funding and attendance calculation things that we had in place this whole year. So upending that in March would not have been good public policy either. So it had our support, and we're glad to have it in place. Other item that you may be interested in is testing for this coming school year. The U.S. Department of Education acting secretary, so this was before Secretary Cardona was confirmed by the Senate. There was an acting secretary that was in place, sent a letter to states that, to sum up, said you need to test students this year. And they did allow for some flexibility on how the test results would be used. And so you have to report the test data. So at an aggregate level, so we'll look at, by school, by district, the test data that's collected, we will make publicly available. But it decouples the testing system from accountability. So you can't use the data to sort of rank schools or move schools up or down in those rating systems. And that's a reasonable accommodation, I think, because the data is going to be so uneven and spotty, and you've got real challenges in who's in person to test versus who's not. Schools will continue to have quarantining pauses in learning this spring. So the data is going to be really messy. So I don't think it would be appropriate to use it for accountability purposes. We have at KDE worked on our testing system, expecting this would be where the U.S. Department of Ed ended up. We worked on our testing system to provide a shorter test. So we removed as many items as we possibly could from it to make the test shorter to take it. I think they were able to carve anywhere from 90 minutes to 2 hours out of the assessment time for students, depending on what grade they were in, what tests they were taking. And we also expanded the testing windows, so schools have got a lot more flexibility in time in terms of when they can give the assessment. But so those were the responses that we made. So we expect to give state tests to kids this year in Kentucky. And that those tests will not be used for accountability, but the results will be publicly available. And that we have expanded flexibility in terms of the number of items, shortened the test in terms of number of items, and expanded flexibility in terms of when tests are given. So there's just a couple of quick high-level items that I thought you might be interested in hearing a little more about. We can, once we run through our agenda, let's also come back to questions that might be about those items toward the end of our time, when we also talk about how we set the agenda for this group. But maybe I could turn things over to Leslie, I think, to lead us through the agenda and introduce everyone.
Thank you so much, Dr. Glass. Welcome, everybody, to the meeting. I'm so glad you all are here. We're going to look at the minutes. I hope you've had a chance to review them. If anybody needs to make any changes, please let us. If you see any changes that need to be made, please let us know. Do I have a motion to? Oh, sorry.
There's one minor change. It's the word then, THEN. It should be than, THAN. And It's about halfway through. I didn't make a note of where it is. But other than that, I make a motion to approve the minutes.
Great. Is there a second?
I'll second. This is Judith. Excuse me.
Great. Thank you, Judith. All in favor?
Aye.
Great.
Aye.
Thank you so much. Let's see. So now we're going to hear from Matthew Courtney on the proposed changes to 703 KAR 5100 SBDM. Thank you, Matthew.
Well, actually, you get Kelly Foster. Good afternoon. I'm the Associate Commissioner of the Office of Continuous Improvement and Support, and Matthew is my policy advisor, and he is also on this webcast with us, or this Teams call, as well as Natasha Stein, who is my branch manager over District 180, which is where the site-based work falls. So we're going to talk to you a little bit today about the proposed changes to 701 KAR 5:100. And the first thing that probably you guys need to understand is what we're doing a little house cleaning with this. During the Kentucky Board of Education meeting in April, we will also be repealing another regulation. And we're pulling some of the pieces out of that regulation and putting it into the changes of this regulation, just to make things a little cleaner, where everything is in one place instead of having some things to deal with site-based in a different regulation. So just know that as we're going through these changes as well. And so there's 4 big points that I want to mention before we get into the slides. But 4 things that you need to know. As I mentioned, we're reducing the number of regulations related to site-based councils and incorporating the content into the content from 701 KAR 5:080 into this regulation. We're also clarifying procedures and creating a timeline for the submission of an alternative SBDM model application. And we are setting standardized effective dates for newly approved alternative SBDM models. And the last item is we are codifying additional requirements to align with the SBDM statute. So at this time, we will move to the next slide. You should have a copy of the regulation. And it looks like a lot of things were marked out, but we'll talk about that as we move forward. It's really not as many changes, but I want to go through the sections with you. Section 1, we are defining parent to have the same meaning as it's defined in KRS 16345. And we're also defining teacher to have the same meaning as defined in 16345. Next slide, please. So you can tell on the screen we have some items that are in bold and some that are not. The items on the following slides that are in bold are actually new items to the regulation, and the items that are not in bold were already part of the regulation, but we're moving things around in the reg to make it a little bit more streamlined. So I'll walk you through the bold items which are new to the regulation on this slide. The first one is we're creating a timeline for the creation and a submission of an alternative model application. So if we have a school that wants to request to have an alternative model for their site base, they need to submit those to the department, to my office, between the timeline of January 1 and March 1. And also in the reg, we are creating a 30-day timeline for the referral of the applications to KBE. This will also require the KBE to review applications at the meeting following the 30-day referral window, and establishing the date for the implementation of a new alternative SBDM model is starting July 1. So let's just say, for example, the KBE approved an alternative model, then that would go in effect starting July 1. If they approve that model in the April board meeting, then it would go into effect July 1. And then the last item on this slide, number 8, talks about clarifying that applications for alternative SBDM models are not required for changes that maintain the statutorily required membership ratios or add non-voting members. So you don't have to, a school would not have to submit an alternative SBDM application if they were not changing the statutory requirements or the member ratios or adding a non-voting member to their council. So that will make things a whole lot easier for local school districts, because probably our number one alternative model request is adding non-voting members. So this will give local schools the flexibility that they don't have to apply to do that. Next slide, please. Okay, section 3. We've got 4 items on here that are new. One that we mentioned on the previous slide, creating that timeline for submission January 1 through March 1, requires requests for exemptions to be referred to the KBE, establishes the date. Once again, we talked about previously in the other section, is those would start July 1, and then requires schools to reapply for any exemptions annually. Next slide, please. Okay, we don't have anything on this slide that is new information to the reg. Like I said before, anything that is not in bold has just been moved around in the regulation to make it flow better. All right, let's look at section 5. Same thing with section 5, no new information. And then the final section, section 6, no new information in that as well. So at this time, I'll be glad to take any questions, and we'll tap into Natasha, who works daily with the site-based councils, as well as Matthew, who's been instrumental in updating this regulation. So I'll be glad to take any questions from the group.
Hey, Kelly, there's a question in the chat box. Are there any changes with respect to school types, i.e. A1 schools have SBDMs, others or some do not?
No, there are no changes in regards to that.
This is Rhonda Loxton. I just wanted to see, and I apologize in advance if I missed it, but was this sent out? Can we get this so that we have time to review it, because we may have more questions? I didn't see it as an attachment, but I may have missed it.
Leslie, was the reg sent out as an attachment?
I can answer that, Kelly. No, it was not.
Oh.
Okay, so does any of the advisory members have access to the reg?
I don't. I tried to do a search for it, but I couldn't bring it up.
Okay.
I couldn't find it.
I just pulled up the original one on the LRC, but we don't have a copy of the proposed revision.
We will get that in the chat for you. just momentarily. And then even after this meeting, if you have any questions or feedback, feel free to reach out to me directly, Kelly Foster, because I apologize that you weren't able to see that ahead of time. And we definitely, would like to hear your feedback. I will say this is kind of, as I mentioned at the beginning, we're just trying to streamline basically 2 regs into one. And as well as make it easier for the local schools if they want to add members to their site base that don't interfere with what's in the statute. So as I said earlier, we have a lot of requests for school districts that want to add non-voting members, sometimes a student, sometimes a classified employee. And so this will allow them to do that without having to bring that request to the Kentucky Board of Education. Matthew or Natasha, anything else you all would like to add?
I will add that we're not able to put the regulation in the chat right now, I think because of the way this meeting is set up as a stream meeting. So we might have to send that through Megan or Leslie via email, but it's coming right now.
Great, thank you.
Hi, this is Judith again. And hi, Kelly. A couple of questions. One I put in the chat was regarding compliance. If there's going to be any tools for auditing SBDMs for compliance, and the reason that I'm asking is that there are several times when I've looked to see if at the time that my son was a student, whether or not the SBDM had policies regarding certain things, and at that time our SBDM did not. And I'm just wondering, how could families, parents, and educators ensure that the SBDM is in fact creating policies for each of the things they're supposed to, and of course, naturally, one of the reasons I'm asking is that often what I've seen in looking at SBDM policies throughout the state, which I do in my spare time, just love to do this, is that they're missing some key things with respect to our special education students and students with disabilities. I'll turn my camera back on so you can see me. Hi. Anyway, so my questions are around, I know you do some auditing. Will there be some training given to SBDMs around these topics, especially related to ECE?
Sure. Natasha, if you would like to join this conversation, Natasha can speak to a little bit about the trainings that are required for site-based councils each year, as well as new member trainings.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for the question, and thank you guys for the opportunity to share some more information regarding SBDM with you. So a couple of things. You are correct in that the department does not necessarily audit a school and its policies. However, we do work to endorse each district's SBDM coordinator. So let's say you were to call the department with a complaint, or you notice that something was missing. We would work with that coordinator to ensure that those councils had the correct policies that were in place. So there is a way that we can mediate there, but they don't have to submit those to us. Outside of that, my branch and the consultants have been working on updating the required trainings that must occur annually for parents and principals and teachers. And we're really driving home the points that you need to have these policies and you need to review them on an annual basis. So that is one angle that we're really trying to work and get ahead of that. Outside of that, like I shared, feel free to contact us, or we post on our website each district's SBDM coordinator. That person can help you as well to ensure that those policies are in place.
Yeah, and ideally not to have it be in arrears, but actually a proactive conversation.
Yes.
So one topic is educational opportunities, which often I think just get overlooked. They forget to address them, especially again for their ECE students. So thank you for that.
Thanks for the question.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, if there aren't any other questions, then I will turn it over. It looks like the next presenter is Dr. Thomas Woods Tucker.
Thank you, Dr. Foster, and thank you, Commissioner Glass, and the hardworking members of the Commissioner's Parent Advisory Council. It's a pleasure to share in conversation with you today and really talk a little bit about what are some of the efforts the Kentucky Department of Education are focusing on to ensure more equitable schools. And it really should say to ensure more equitable opportunities for students, because that's what we're in the business for. We're in the business to ensure that our students have every opportunity to be successful. Megan West, I want to thank you. She's going to advance the slides for us. So if Megan, if you could go ahead and pull up the slides. And then we also want to welcome our very own Dr. Damian Sweeney. He's going to jump off and on in this presentation. And we're happy to have Damian on. He's the coordinator of our comprehensive school counseling program in the Office of Teaching and Learning. And we certainly know how important our counselors are in terms of the roles that they will play in helping our students address social and emotional learning. Next slide, please. Today is what we call Mindful Wednesday, and I'm going to ask Dr. Sweeney to talk a little bit here shortly about mindfulness and this whole theory behind mindfulness, why it is important. And then I'm going to walk you through a small exercise that you can try yourselves and also with your students. And one word before we bring on Dr. When we talk with students, whether they're our kids or just our students don't talk first about academics. You notice we haven't talked about academics yet or really had a deep conversation about testing. We're mostly concerned about the social, emotional, affective parts of our students, what really makes up the whole child. And so I would like for Damian to talk a little bit about mindfulness, and then I'll lead us through a very small exercise regarding Mindfulness Wednesday. Dr. Sweeney.
Yes, thank you for the introduction. Parents, it's nice to share space with you. Thank you for the opportunity. Megan West, thank you for the opportunity for both Dr. Woods Tucker and I to speak. So mindfulness has been proven to not only help our students, but also to help our teachers. It can help you right now if we were, as Dr. Woods Tucker is going to go through this exercise. So imagine students that are dysregulated. When we stop and pause and take a moment to become mindful and present, right, we're able to focus a little bit more of our energy on the moment versus all of the different things, all of the different tasks that we have to get done, all of the different parts of our life that we might not be as happy about. So mindfulness is something that I believe all of our schools should do. And as Dr. Woods Tucker spoke about social emotional learning, we're going to speak about that a little bit more. But this aspect of education, has really got to become a priority for all schools and all educators. And it can't just be the school counselor that owns social emotional learning. It's got to be all of our teachers. It's got to be our administrators. It's got to be our district central offices. And of course, here at KDE. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Sweeney. I heard three important terms stick out relative to mindfulness: being aware, living in the present, and being non-judgmental, and just being kind. And so in this small exercise, I would like for you to pretend that you've never seen raisins, you've never seen a bowl of raisins in your life. So let's take a few seconds to get your mind in that state. So just pretend you've never seen raisins before. Then I want you now, and you can put this in the chat box, if you've never had raisins before, please put in the chat box what raisins if you had these raisins, now imagine you had raisins in your hands. Tell me in the chat box what raisins feel like. So again, we want you to pretend that you've never had them before. This would be a conversation you would have with your student. And you would give your student these raisins. And you would ask him or her to, and you would put this in your chat box, what would they feel like? One of our parents said sticky. Okay, good. Let's keep going. Some other things. Squishy, icky, leathery, a roly-poly, wrinkly, wrinkled. Okay, so very good. So the whole purpose here is to get ourselves and to get our students focused on the raisins, focused directly on these raisins. And when we're focused on when we're focused on one thing, we're not expending any energy focusing on negative type things. So it's about getting ourselves and getting our students in the moment. As you know, our students are beginning to come back to school full time, and hopefully before the end of the year, everyone is back in school full time. And a lot of things are going to be on their mind because some of our children have not been in school in almost a year. And so there will be a lot of distractions out there. A lot of things will distract them from what's at hand, which is learning, and which is okay. But we want to make sure we help our students to focus on the positive things and not worry about a lot of the negative things that are in their lives. So thank you for participating in that. Megan, would you please advance to the next slide? So why now? We start to talk about ensuring that every student, regardless of his or her ethnicity, socioeconomic background, gender expression, disability, capability, or exceptionality, or religious preference, is treated equitably. Why now? I think Dr. King in his 1963 I Have a Dream speech really summed it up. But it also says that we've been fighting for this for a while, so this is not new. This is not new for Commissioner Glass. It's not new for our Kentucky Board of Education in passing a resolution on equity and passing a resolution denouncing racist institutions and racist organizations and implicit bias. This has been a long fight by Americans across the country. So if you would allow me to indulge here for a few seconds. We've also come to this hallowed spot to remind America of the fierce urgency of now. This is no time to engage in the luxury of cooling off or to take the tranquilizing drug of gradualism. Now is the time to rise from the dark and desolate valley of segregation to the sunlit path of racial justice. Now's the time to open the doors of opportunity to all of God's children. Now's the time to lift our nation from the quicksands of racial injustice to the solid rock of brotherhood and sisterhood. If you will, take a few seconds, a few moments, and put in the chat box some of the words here, some of the eloquent words used by Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. here. Please put some of those words in the chat box. We'll take a few seconds, maybe 60 seconds to do that, please. Okay, very good. Please advance to the next slide. And the reason I wanted us to take part in that exercise As you all know, almost a year ago, it'll be a year on Saturday, that Breonna Taylor was killed in her home. And that, amongst other civil rights issues and civil rights occurrences where people have lost their lives and people have marched, that event in Louisville, in the taking of Breonna Taylor's life, sparked an international civil rights movement, and it's impacted our kids' lives. The pandemic, a once in a century occurrence, has been impacting their lives for almost a year now as well. And so as our students come back to school, that's going to be on their minds, and we need to make sure that we are equipping our students, we're equipping our support staff, our teaching and administrative staffs to first and foremost address the social and emotional needs of our students. And I'm going to ask Dr. Sweeney here in a little bit to come back and talk more about this as we get through this presentation. So again, why now? We believe here at KDE that all schools should be safe havens for all students and staff, again, regardless of their race, their ethnicity, their sexual orientation, national origin, or ability. And they should always feel respected and welcomed. KDE wants to support and assist all school entities in their diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts, and we'll talk a little bit about that. And thanks for the comment, the amen comment. Being the grandson of a Baptist preacher, I love to hear amens from time to time. So thanks for that in the chat box. Then also, we want to lead the charge for diversity, equity, and inclusion, and help establish a culture that does not accept any type of achievement gaps. Next slide, please. The Kentucky Department of Education's commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion, as I mentioned a minute ago, the Kentucky Department of Education has identified 4 priorities in its strategic plan. It's equity, achievement, collaboration, and integrity. In July of 2020, your Kentucky Board of Education affirmed its commitment to racial equity and racial injustice in all schools in a resolution stating in part that our educators should embrace diversity, assure equity, and to help shape the future of all Kentucky's children. Every student, I mean each student in the Commonwealth, we have approximately 650,000 public school children, and every student in the Commonwealth deserves equitable treatment, equitable access to great teachers who have unique experiences, perspectives, great role models, and quality preparation to help ensure student success. Additionally, educators, schools, and districts must commit to listening, to seeking to be heard, and to ensure young people of color feel valued and safe in schools and in the community. And I'm sure in the end, Commissioner Glass is going to invite you again to his listening tours that'll run from April to May, modeling the board's and the commissioner's commitment to listening to our young people and listening to our community, and especially those who've not had much of a voice. Next slide, please. And we also need to acknowledge that our teachers, principals, and support staff and superintendents are facing some of the most difficult challenges in the history of education. Heightened bipartisan politics continue to come and bear upon public education. Racial tensions and uncertainty of new educational policies in Washington, D.C. Our new Secretary of Education, whom we think is going to do an awesome job, has a lot of work ahead of himself and the entire department. And so we are yet to see what will come of that, but we're all excited about it. And then how do we take care of the social and emotional needs of our students, staff, and administrators during this time? This is our first time experiencing a pandemic. And so, again, we're going to make sure that we're addressing our students' hearts, their emotions, the affect before we engage in about the academics. The academics are important, but if you don't take care of the heart and the affect, the academics won't come. Next slide, please. So let's talk real quickly now on where we are. We are ensuring that we're utilizing resources of professional staffs like our counselors, psychologists, social workers, and we're asking our school districts to marshal in community partners, because it's going to take an entire village. It's going to take everyone in the village, all villagers, to really ensure that our students are successful today and going forward. We're building true comprehensive school counseling programs that are preventive versus reactive. And most of our school mental health practitioners should be in Tier 1 versus Tier 2 and Tier 3. And now I'm going to ask Dr. Sweeney to come on and talk a little bit more about some of the behavioral health initiatives we have.
Yeah, so there were some questions, Dr. Tucker, in the or some comments in the chat box about, what is the intersection between equity and special education, and is that being addressed? And so I let them know a little bit about our conversation with the Kentucky Council for Children with Behavioral Disorders last night. Dr. Tucker and I spoke about our session was called Stand Up, Equity for Students with Emotional and Behavioral Disorders. So we would be happy to, we actually just got a recording about that today, back today. So we'd be happy to share that with you. So to expand on what Dr. Tucker has already spoken about, so I'm obviously very excited as somebody that's a resource for school counselors about building comprehensive school counseling programs throughout our state. It's so important. And we're currently working with the Department for Behavioral Health, Developmental, and Intellectual Disabilities to educate schools on, so we're calling it integrated mental health. There's also another term you can use, interconnected systems frameworks and asset mapping. So one issue that we're hearing from schools is that our school mental health providers and our community mental health providers, they really need to become aligned. And so far, there hasn't been much work. There hasn't been a ton of work to ensure that all of our community mental health agencies, along with our school mental health people, are following a protocol or setting up meetings or ensuring that they are working within all three tiers of a multi-tier system of support. So that work is coming, and we're really excited about that. We're also acknowledging that diversity, equity, inclusion, and social emotional learning are all drivers within our curriculum. You talk about special education students. I used to be a special education teacher, and I worked with with students with emotional and behavioral disabilities. And one thing that Dr. Tucker and I spoke about last night is these kiddos don't often get to see themselves in the curriculum. They don't often get to see themselves on the walls of the school and artifacts of people that share their lived experience. So we have got to do a better job at being inclusive and acknowledging that diversity and equity and social emotional learning, along with that inclusion, are all drivers within our curriculum. And finally, we should build awareness that societal issues that impact our communities also impact our schools. I'll give you a quick example. 2 superintendents from 2 rural counties in Western Kentucky called me this summer, and they said, we'd like you to train our staffs. They said, we had a peaceful protest on one side of the street on a Saturday. On the other side of the street, there was a mob that was yelling and cursing at the other side of the street. What they said next was really profound. They said, we acknowledge that the kids that we're educating today will get to decide which side of the street they're on tomorrow. Okay, so making sure that we understand that acknowledging what happens in our community now is going to teach our kids for the future. And finally, our success in addressing these issues is directly related to our ability to collaborate and work together as a community.
Absolutely. Damien, thanks for adding that part. And I feel fortunate, and I hope that the agency is fortunate. In my new role as the agency's chief equity officer, I also help to supervise the Office of Teaching and Learning. That's where our standards come from. And so we are very intentional now. And again, I feel blessed because when it's time for us to revise our standards that our schools used to create their curricular frameworks, we can ensure that we're looking at these standards in an equitable way. As Dr. Sweeney said, when we look at these standards, are they fair? Are we working hard to ensure that students of all different exceptionalities are considered and and they see themselves in the curriculum? And so again, that's one of the beautiful byproducts of having both roles, taking a look at our standard review process with an equity lens. Okay, let's quickly talk about a couple other things here. And again, we're going to ensure that we have some time for you all to ask some questions. Next slide, please. When we start to look at equity for all students, it really starts with ensuring that we have really high standards in place. We have rigorous standards in place. And this ensures that every student have grade level, every student has grade level learning opportunities, regardless of what part of the Commonwealth students reside and teachers reside. You have access to these standards free of charge. We are in partnership with the Council of Chief State School Officers, and part of the group we work with is called the High Quality Instructional Resources Professional Learning Project. I know that's a mouthful, but this is a consortium of 13 states from across the country. And our goal is to equip and empower all local schools in evaluating and selecting and providing high quality and resource standards that they have. And what the research has shown, let's say there's a subject area where a teacher may be a novice in the field, but if he or she high quality instructional resources, the research is showing, the studies are showing that students are gaining a year and sometimes 2 years of growth, of academic growth, even though there's a novice teacher in the classroom. So we're really fortunate to be a part of that. And in a few weeks, you will hear more about that. And Mickey Ray in the Office of Teaching and Learning has done a phenomenal job in helping to get that out. Another thing I'm really happy about, because I've been a long time advocate of a multi-tiered support system for students that address both the academic, behavioral, social, and emotional learning aspects of students' academic growth. And many times we leave out the social and emotional learning. Dr. Sweeney, you want to talk a little bit about this, because I know you all have done some phenomenal work over the last couple of years in building this MTSS project, but also working across the agency, and we're getting ready to launch a website here at the agency for our community.
Yes, it's amazing. We're really excited about the website. So what we've recognized is that many educators look at MTSS through multiple lenses, right? So as a school counselor, I'm kind of looking at it through one. As a teacher, I'm looking at it through another. So what we're hoping to do is really put everything together so that everybody's looking through the same lens with this multi-tiered system of support. When you're talking about tier one, you're talking about trying to do something universally for all students. Tier two is going to hit that 15% or so that maybe didn't fully comprehend the information delivered in tier one. Tier three is going to be about 5% who need further intervention. Now, as a school counselor, when we're talking about the social emotional wellness of our students, let me put it to you like this. Tier one would be us going in and doing full school counseling curriculum lessons. I want desperately for our school counselors to normalize the emotions of our students. What I'm concerned about is that we have students that might think that they're outcasts because they're experiencing anxiety or depression. When we talk about an integrated mental health system, like I spoke about before, we can actually use our community agency partners to help us within each tier. Okay, so we're going to do that full group in tier one. In terms of school counseling, tier two is going to be individual counseling or small group counseling. Tier three is going to be crisis support.
And Dr. Sweeney, thanks for interjecting the part about our community resources. And also our parents. We want parent engagement to be a huge part of this. And again, this is one of the most comprehensive MTSS systems I've seen, where it really meets the whole child. You'll hear later in the year about children's cabinets, and that's really bringing the entire community together to meet the needs of children. But I think we're off to a great start right here in the Commonwealth with our very strong MTSS support system. I'm going to talk a little bit later about our equitable practices policy scan. When I came here to the agency back in November, I sent out a policy scan to the superintendents, then to Commissioner Glass's Teacher Advisory Committee, Principal Advisory Committee, and then I worked closely with Tony Constatman to send the scan out to everybody in the Commonwealth. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that. If you have not answered those 4 questions regarding diversity, equity, and inclusion, please, parents, please take time to do that. And so the purpose was to get feedback from all of our stakeholders in our community to really see where we are in terms of equity, diversity, and inclusion. Are those practices in policy as the Kentucky Board of Education has passed a resolution? Are they part of a resolution? Are they in strategic plan? Because it's one thing just to talk about ensuring that every student has an equitable opportunity to be successful. It's another thing actually doing it, putting it on paper, putting it right and executing it. And then the last thing here that I want to talk about in this section here is a big kudos to our folks who worked extremely hard to bring the Kentucky Academy for Equity in Teaching to life. It's called the CATE program. Huge kudos to our governor and our Lieutenant Governor Coleman, and of course, Commissioner Glass. This program is dedicated to the recruitment, retention of a diverse educator workforce that more closely resembles the current student population in Kentucky. So we're really not just talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion. The lawmakers put forth $1 million to help make this come to fruition. So kudos to the Commonwealth and our leaders. Yes, amen. Next slide, please. At the school level, we're speaking here to folks at the school level, district levels, about disproportionality. As Dr. Sweeney mentioned, we had a great conversation with our folks from the Kentucky Council of Children with Behavior Disabilities. I call it exceptionalities, not behavior, not disabilities. We spoke with them last night, had a great conversation. And so we're addressing disproportionality. The numbers are, they're heartbreaking, not only here in Kentucky, but across this country. But we're going to work hard to ensure that all students have access to AP courses, IB courses, Cambridge, and dual credit for all students. We're speaking to our district leaders about some of the obstacles, like some of the gatekeeper courses, like Algebra 1 in 8th grade, and looking at outdated policies. And that's huge, folks, looking at outdated policies and over-reliance on test scores. Sometimes we have policies in place unintentionally that may not be equitable for all students, that may not be equitable in terms of academics or behavioral. So again, we're enjoying those conversations. We're also continuing our involvement through professional learning at KDE. We took a step back a couple weeks ago, and we had to ask ourselves, what does equity mean for us at KDE? What does it mean for us in our positions? And so we're continuing to ask that question of ourselves, because we cannot move forward until we answer that question. And we're looking forward to some even deeper conversations within the agency, and also with some of the national experts like Dr. Roger Cleveland, some of you may have heard of. And then also, we're investigating how to marshal and reallocate every child in the Commonwealth has the resources, teachers, and interventions and supports that they need. In my short time here at KDE, I've found our staff to be dedicated, they're outstanding, and totally child-centered. Our presenters today have said to me, Thomas, here's some history on equity here. here are some things relative to diversity and equity that we're using in our department, and let's make this across the entire agency. So I'm really happy about that. Next slide, please. And the last part here, we're also committed to providing sample language to school districts so that they can use to create surveys to find out how they're going about treating students in an equitable way. We're also working with this survey group called Panorama, which has really given us some great information about educating all students. And we're looking at how we can show equity over time. And so a lot of work done in helping school districts do some survey type research, if you will. Then we're also encouraging equity to be embedded, as I said earlier, in school district strategic plans and also in their own building plans, if you will, and district-wide strategic plans. And we're pointing to innovative research that will further our work here in the Commonwealth by providing high quality standards aligned curriculum and resources. Again, the great opportunity we have and we're enjoying with the Council of Chief State School Officers. Next slide, please. In this section here, I mentioned that we're looking at KDE in order for us to go out, to help our schools with these tough conversations, our school districts. And by the way, I want to provide this caveat. We have school districts in Kentucky that are doing a great job of tackling diversity, equity, and inclusion. So I don't want anyone to think, and I didn't come here thinking that we had it all figured out here in Kentucky or that we were behind. And we're nowhere behind our peers in other districts or other states. So I want to make sure I mention that there are some districts that are doing some great work. But what I've seen in my 3 months of a listening tour, if you will, there seems to be a lack of understanding of some terms like equity, equality, and inclusivity. And when we build our toolbox, we're going to make sure that that toolbox has a list of common language. So we're using this common terminology not only across KDE, but also across the Commonwealth. Also, how do we help folks engage in courageous conversations? And how do we create common ground to create support for all students and broaden the definition of diversity? Because diversity, many times when we talk about diversity, we go directly to skin tone. We go directly to the amount of melanin in students, in people's skin. It's far more than that. It's far more encompassing. It encompasses those descriptions I said earlier. And how do we ensure that students see themselves in the curriculum? Because we do know from research and from practice as classroom educators and as administrators, when students see curriculum that's looks like them, they see curriculum that represents them, that they're more engaged. They read about people who look like them, role models who look like them, they're more engaged. And so 3 quick terms that we've already discussed is equity. It's simply respecting each student's culture and providing each student the resources he or she needs to be successful. I didn't say equally, I said equitably, and giving each student the resources that she or he needs. And I want to make this statement here because I've heard this from now 3 national politicians, that a call for equity does not implicitly suggest racism. And these national politicians are saying that that's what it is. Equity is not a call for racism, and it does not suggest racism. Equality is treating every student in the same manner, irrespective of differences, and assuming all have bootstraps. All of our students don't have boots, and all of them don't have bootstraps. A quick 30-second story here. I have 4 children, all different ages, all different sizes, 2 boys, 2 girls. Let's say if I were going out to the store to buy them some gym shoes. What if I came back with a size 11? There's no way all 4 of my children, who range in the age from 13 to 30, would wear the same size. And that's what equality means. I love inclusivity because when we think about inclusivity, that means all stakeholders have a voice in the educational process, and critical pedagogy, again, getting back where our students see themselves in the pedagogy. They see themselves in the curriculum. They see. Next slide, please. As I said earlier, when we look at equality, there's this assumption, or meritocracy. There's this assumption that all students should just pull themselves up by their bootstraps. And if there's one thing that this pandemic has taught us, COVID-19 has taught us, there's been a bright light that has been shining on our most vulnerable students. And we know all of our students can be at risk, but especially our most vulnerable students. Those are students who come from homes where the socioeconomic status is low, our students who receive free or reduced price meals, many of our students of color, as we talked about earlier, our students who have exceptionalities, who may have individualized education plans, our students whose English may not be their primary language spoken at home. And so COVID has put a bright light on that. It has shown us that all students don't have a bootstrap, and that's why our government is stepping in, ensuring that schools have resources to meet the needs of all of our students, again, especially our students of color and traditionally marginalized students. Many times they don't get pairs of boots. They don't come home from the hospital with pairs of boots. And so I'm glad that we have a commitment here in the Commonwealth, and I'm seeing a greater commitment across this country to meet the needs of more and more students. Okay, moving on, and I should be wrapped up here in a couple minutes. In addition to courageous conversations, we heard earlier that we need to continue to engage in racial conversation about racial trauma and implicit bias. These are things that are mentioned in the Kentucky Board of Education's resolution. And these conversations are needed across Kentucky. And it doesn't matter what the racial makeup of our schools, districts, or communities. Many times we think that, well, we need to have these conversations in majority minority schools. And that's not the case. When I listen to students across this Commonwealth, students were 98% of the students are majority or white. They're saying, Dr. Tucker, they're saying Commissioner Glass, they're saying Dr. Sweeney, we need to have these conversations here. And we have enough time. I'm getting excited about this, but if we have enough time, I will tell you a little bit about a project that Commissioner Glass's Student Advisory Committee is creating right now, which is a fantastic program that they're creating to help students across the Commonwealth with these tough conversations. And in June of 2020, the district created some guidance on how districts and how schools can facilitate conversations about race-based stress and trauma. And it's tough. We have to acknowledge that it's a tough endeavor to talk about race-based stress and trauma. But I certainly salute our colleagues here at the Kentucky Department of Education, their trauma and resilience team in partnership with the Kentucky Department of Behavioral Health and Development and Intellectual Disabilities, again, a cross-agency initiative, and we'll make sure that that's in the link for you all to access. Next slide, please. We're happy to announce that we've begun work, and certainly want to thank Dr. Sweeney with this. We've begun, and also our Director of Communications, Tony Cons-Tatman. We're starting to work in the creation of an equity toolkit, and this KDE's equity or racial toolkit will provide districts and schools with resources like how they can utilize this MTSS support system that we talked about, guidance on how to facilitate these courageous conversations, resources for our educators about inclusive curriculum and unconscious bias training. There will be videos and research-based informed series of cultural competency and equity training modules. Folks, all free resources for all of our stakeholders, for educators and parents right here in your Kentucky Department of Education. Next slide, please. So it's really up to us to examine our privilege and our implicit biases. And again, this is tough work. That by doing so, educators, parents, community members can reflect on where they are and decide where we can go. But just a few words of caution: it will take a lot of determination, and it will take a willingness for us to improve, and a recognition that we're going to make some mistakes along the way, but at the end, our children will be better off in a more inclusive state and a more inclusive country. Next slide. And in this depiction here, you see a mindset, a growth mindset versus a fixed mindset. The growth mindset is open to change, is open to introspection. Last 2 minutes here, as I mentioned, Tony Constantman has sent out our statewide equity inclusion scan, and it just has a few questions. So parents, again, if you've not filled that scan out, please do so. And you can phrase the question based upon what you know about your child's school. For example, when you look at your child's school, what are some of the equitable practices, particularly with an emphasis on racial equity, inclusion, and diversity? What do you think they already have in place? And does your district have an equity or inclusion action plan, or is equity included in your district strategic plan? So those are a few questions. And about a month or so ago, we have some results. So let's quickly take 1 minute to look at some of those results. So this is what the form looked like. So in order to know how we can help, we need your feedback. What systems do you currently have in place? How can we best support you in creating a more inclusive learning environment for all students? And our goal really was to share and discuss results from the Google form, not only with during my presentation at the Kentucky Association of School Superintendents on December 8th. It was to ensure that we continue to have these conversations, whether it's with Commissioner Glass's Parent Advisory Committee, the Kentucky School Boards Association, and we shared the results recently with the Kentucky Board of Education. Next slide, please. Early on, and again, this is just a snapshot. The scan has been opened quickly here. In a question about whether your school or district currently has an equity and inclusion plan, a little over 54% responded no. And another question asking whether equity is included in your district strategic plan, a little over a third of the respondents said no, and more than 51% of the respondents said equity is included in their district strategic plan. Okay, next slide. So early on, what have our stakeholders said they want or they need? Most of our students are white and need exposure to more diversity and assistance with unintentional biases. Show models of best practice, including more than race or ethnicity, as we talked about. And they want us to provide guidance and resources. And these will be free resources, real resources, to help school districts and students and parents and staff make more equitable and rigorous learning environments a reality for all of our 650,000 students. And they want us to continue to take feedback on this issue, holding meetings with teachers, staff, and families. And that's why we left the scan open. And the last slide, please. It is all up to all of us to advance equity and racial justice in our nation's schools, not just the Commissioner's Parent Advisory Committee or the Commissioner or folks here. It's going to take every villager in the village. So thank you for allowing Dr. Sweeney and I to have this conversation with you. And I think, Commissioner Glass, we have an opportunity to take some questions relative to this or any other questions your committee members may have.
Great, thanks, Thomas and Damian. Let's turn things over to our parent advisory for what their thoughts are in response to this presentation and questions or reactions that you have.
Well, if I could, first of all, I want to say thank you. And I've had the great pleasure, and Damien's like, probably like, oh no, Rhonda's talking again. But I've had the great pleasure to work with Damien on the SEAC with this very thing and working with the strategic plan that not only includes many organizations with the commissioner, also with KDE as a representative on the SEAC. But I do think this is what's going to be critical. And I'm so grateful that I am hearing this in multiple arenas because our children cannot wait. The thing I hear many times is, let's not let this opportunity pass. Well, if you're actually living in this opportunity is your everyday opportunity. This is a life you cannot not only escape, but the treatment that you may receive and the equity that comes with it. So we have to realize first that this is something that to others, they may just be having for the moment. For those living it, you never get away from it. And it has always been an issue. And it's not just, as you all spoke, that it is just not something that has just miraculously happened. So my thing is, how can we work together and continue to do this, and not only in a way that we address one, but we address all? Because if you are actually doing equality right and removing all barriers, you are not only doing it based on race, ethnicity, disability, you're doing it for all who have not received equal treatment and opportunities. And not only from the standpoint of our children in school, but their families, but then also being able, we are missing out on a huge, great opportunity. And I am so thankful that I'm also seeing that we need to make sure that the workforce that is teaching our children represents our children, right? Because we are missing out on those who have experienced any type of differences are probably going to be your best teachers and your best staff you've ever had in your life. They bring with them a unique experience, not only of the education to offer, but the personal experience that regardless of if your child, who your child is, they're going to benefit from. So I'm sorry I'm rambling, but any way that we can work to continue this and not, it's going to take all of us together. And I want to make sure too that in the opportunity with the inclusion scan, that we could share that. Do we also, is it just an inclusion scan that is concentrating this time just on race, or was it open? Because, and I may have missed it, but I want to make sure not only that I do it, but that other families have the opportunity. So I'm very grateful you've left it open. Is it looking at the overall? And I'll hush, but thank you so much.
Yep. Rhonda, thanks for raising that question. And actually, it's a point of clarification. When we talk about diversity, equity, inclusion, we're going beyond race. We're going beyond ethnicity. We're looking at, again, when we talk about the inclusive nature equity scan, we're talking about gender. We're talking about sexual orientation, sexual preference, religious preference, any exceptionality that's out there. And you made a very insightful statement. When we focus on all of our children, it makes life much better. And what can we do going forward? One of the exciting opportunities that we have is for all of us to come together. And I see that is happening in here in the Commonwealth of Kentucky. And I was just pleased to have a conversation with Commissioner Glass back in July regarding this opportunity, and he said to me, he said, Thomas, it's going to be a whole lot of work. I want to let you know that ahead of time, but it's going to be great work because we have an opportunity to do something rare here in Kentucky. It's to make not only academics more equitable for all students, but also ensure that we are focusing on giving individual students what they need. And so that's very rare. And that was memorialized in, as I said earlier, was memorialized in your Kentucky Board of Education's resolution. That was extremely, extremely powerful. And I would challenge every state board of education in the country to draft a resolution to draft policies regarding diversity, equity, and inclusion. I would challenge all of our school districts, our local school districts. And what can we do? I would say go back to your local school district. If they have not drafted an equity policy, I would ask them to do so, or ask why not.
Dr. Woods Tucker, Judith Bradley has her hand up.
Hello. I'm sorry. I'm not sure if you heard me. A couple of things. Number one, I just want to echo. Are you all hearing me? I'm not sure.
Yes, we are.
Okay,
yes.
Thank you. You were cutting in a little bit in and out earlier, and I wasn't sure if that was me, my connection or not. First of all, I want to echo what Rhonda said. I deeply appreciate this work. I personally and others with whom I work have been waiting for it for a long time. So number one is, despite all of my questions and probing, my overall feeling is one of pure joy and glee. So just please know that. I am also really happy to hear that there's an expanded definition, because my experience has been repeatedly that disability in particular is often left out of the conversation when it comes to equity. And it is the intersection with race in particular is really profound, as I'm sure you are well aware, and very concerning. So I hope that will be a place to get to as well. One of the things I'm going to post is right now, actually in the chat I just did, is that the Pritchard Committee has done some really marvelous work. And I know Brooke is here from the Pritchard Committee around community and family engagement. And another thing I applaud is the direction of really authentic engagement. And Ann Henderson, whose book I just put a link to, called Beyond the Bake Sale, is really a great person to look at for how to more authentically engage. And I think there are many of us out here who really want to truly collaborate. So all I have to say is thank you. Thank you for the conversation and the presentation and all the great work. And I look forward to continuing.
Thank you.
Okay, well, if there are no other questions or items for discussion on this, let's look to our next agenda item. I think I'm on my mobile device, so I can't see, but I think we had an update on mental health and social emotional learning and trauma.
Yes, sir.
Great, and go ahead.
I was going to say thank you. Her PowerPoint's up right now.
Okay. This is Debbie Sauber. I'm with the Safe and Supportive Schools branch of the Division of Student Success, and I want to thank you all for inviting me. This has been a wonderful experience so far, and I'm looking forward to giving you some more information. I will start by telling you I've been a little bit under the weather this week, so I hope I'm at the top of my game today, but if not, I apologize in advance. And Megan's going to advance the slides for me while I talk, because sometimes it's hard to do two things at once. Thank you, Megan. Okay, advance. All right, So we've already talked quite a bit today about mindfulness, social emotional learning, race, equity, disabilities, all that type of thing. And that is a perfect segue into what I'm talking about today, because we're going to look at some of the specific types of trainings that our division can offer. The Safe and Supportive Schools branch is responsible for the initiatives that you see on the screen: school safety concerns, mental health and wellness, suicide prevention, bullying prevention, substance use treatment prevention, human trafficking, child sexual abuse, and emergency operations planning, because all of those things are very well tied in together. For instance, school safety, you can have an incredibly safe building, but if you don't feel emotionally safe inside the building, you're still not really safe. So all of those initiatives overlap, and a great deal of the work on these initiatives occur in this division, which is under the direction of Christina Weeder and our Associate Commissioner, Kelly Foster. Next slide, please. Okay, so the way that we address those issues is through training and technical assistance. And we provide support and information to school districts and regional educational cooperatives more than we do directly with schools. More support for district contacts and regional co-ops. We promote a positive school climate, encouraging mental health awareness and building resiliency, not only for educators, but also non-educators and parents and families. Next. Okay, it's types of trainings that we offer: social and emotional learning and well-being, which we've already talked a great deal about today. Mindfulness practices, again, has already been discussed, but I'll go into that a little bit more in a minute. Sources of strength, Olvea's bullying prevention program. It took me a while to learn how to say that word. I kept wanting to call it Olvea's, but it's not pronounced that way. Trauma-informed practices for educators, resiliency strategies for educators, positive behavioral interventions and supports, along with interconnected systems framework. They're one and the same meshed together. And then youth mental health first aid, which I'll talk a little bit more in depth toward the end of the presentation. Next. Okay. So as we've already discussed today, social emotional learning refers to how we learn to understand and manage emotions and set our goals and feel empathy for others. So since some of this has already been talked about and discussed, I won't go into great detail about it, but it's nice to see that other branches and divisions of KDE are actively involved in this work, the same as us, and that there's so much interest in this. For our purposes, we use the SEL framework from CASEL, which I'm going to say their name wrong, but it's the Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning. There is a tremendous amount of information on their website related to these companies that you see here: self-awareness and self-management, decision-making, relationship skills, and social awareness. So a lot of our trainings and programs use those competencies and information and research from CASEL to support our work. Next. So we know from a large body of research that high-quality SEL programs improve academics, they decrease anxiety among students and adults, and they provide other benefits as well. So I can't underscore the importance of social emotional learning and well-being. Next. All right. Science has linked SEL to student gains, and this comes from CASEL's organizations, from their website right here. I'll just give you a minute to look at that. I don't want to read all that for you, but if teachers possess social emotional competencies, they're more likely to be able to teach and model those competencies for students. So although the majority of our work is looking at school districts and co-ops for educators, we also want to look at what we can do for parents and families and for other community groups, because all of those people, all those adults, have a direct impact on the students in school. And, you know, we want to improve their outcome at school and at home and in the community, and reduce criminal activity and substance abuse to the extent that we can. Okay. Next. All right. Mindfulness. We are fortunate enough in our branch to have a person who trains in mindfulness on a regular basis, and she has a great deal of experience in that program, and it can be extremely beneficial. And many of our other trainings, we end with mindful moments or start with mindful moments or guided imagery, just to help people have time to let some of that sink in. So that is a training that we can provide for you. The lady who does that is named Judy Vanderhaar. Next, sources of strength. This one is basically a suicide prevention program, but it does not tout itself so much as suicide prevention. It is what it says. Looking at the sources of strength within youth, asset framing, capacity building, those are other words that mean the same type of thing. So this program is designed for mostly for middle and high school students, but they do now have an elementary age curriculum, so that can be implemented in pretty much any school out there. We have, I think, 2 trainers in our division for sources of strength, but this is a partnership with the Division of Behavioral Health, because the majority of the funding and training for this particular initiative comes from them. But this program is really good because it's youth-led. There's a team of peer leaders along with adult advisors who develop programs within the school to help build on the sources of strength. And you can see them on this wheel. Things like mental health, family support, positive friends, spirituality, generosity, all of those things are so important when you're trying to build the emotional capacity of young people. And when young people help you design those programs and promote activities to showcase those activities, you're going to have a better outcome. It's always better to include your youth and parents if you can, because you're going to get more input from them, if instead of just the teacher saying, well, I think this program will work for our kids and we can build their strengths this way, let's involve our kids instead. It is a social networking approach, and it builds on the contagion of strength. Instead of focusing so much on what's negative out there or what I don't have, it's more about look at what you do have and how can you tap into those strengths that you have when you're having a mental health crisis or thinking about substance abuse or other types of what we would consider not pro-social behavior. Okay, next. The Alveus Bullying Prevention Program is another school-wide comprehensive program. And we've talked already about the MTSS framework and the tiered levels of support. And so Alveus would be considered a tier 1 intervention because it is comprehensive and it's school-wide. And it's focused on long-term change, creating a positive school environment. The elementary curriculum is fairly recent, but the middle, junior high, and high school curriculum's been around for a while. If you understand what bullying is, it's sort of a pattern of aggressive behavior where there's an imbalance of power. So sometimes with bullying, things like peer mediation doesn't really work, or negotiating, problem solving. But a school-wide program that simply says we're not going to allow bullying. If I see it, I'm going to report it. I'm going to intervene. I'm going to not be a bullier. Then that works a little bit better for kids. So we can offer this program to you. We have, I think, 6 trainers in our division who are certified to teach this program now, and it is designed for schools. However, the training committee for this program asks for community people and parents who have kids in that school, because again, parent input is crucial, student input is crucial. And there's also a component of this that is for community organizations. For instance, if you are sending kids from school to an after-school program, but the after-school program doesn't know the bullying prevention program that's going on in the school, they may be inadvertently engaging in activities that would be considered adult bullying with those kids. So there's also a piece of this to try to train community groups so that if you're engaged with youth in any kind of activity, after school, before school, during the summer, that you understand what bullying looks like and sounds like, and that you know a way to make sure you're not part of the problem. Okay, next. Trauma-informed practices is extremely well done framework that we've also talked about quite a bit today. we have a contract with the UK Center for Trauma in Children, and they've provided training collaboratives for all of our staff and for many staff in school districts and co-ops across the state in trauma-informed practices. So we want to make sure that anyone who is engaged in the education of our young people is not only trauma-informed, but trauma-responsive. Because the thing about trauma is that it's not the same for everybody. What might be traumatic for me would not be traumatic for someone else, or vice versa. And that trauma is cumulative. You can have a child have a behavior outbreak for something that seems trivial to somebody, but if that's just one piece in a long line of trauma events, then there's a lot more to that child's trauma reaction than what you might know. So it's very helpful to have this type of training and to look at what, if I know that a child has a trauma event and they've had a severe effect and a severe reaction, then acting out in school might be the response to that. So do I need to discipline them, or do I need to be aware that there's something going on with this kid? And in which case I need to call a counselor or school social worker or another mental health professional to help me provide this child with whatever needs they have. This one is primarily provided by Catherine Tillett in our division, but also Miriam Silman, who's at the Division for Behavioral Health. Next. Resiliency Strategies for Educators is another training that we provide through a partnership with the U.S. Department of Education, Safe and Healthy Students. We provided this training, or offered it, actually last Friday, and had over 100 people signed up to take that training, which is very heartening, because educators are people too. They also experience trauma. They experience bullying in the workplace and at home. They've experienced this pandemic the same as our students, maybe in a different way. But these types of national emergencies and things that cause a lot of emotional upset to our adults impact not only how they live their lives and the choices they make, but also how they impact our young people. So this training is offered to help adults more than anything, to look at your level of self-control. What is your ability to calm yourself, to take control of yourself? Do you have ways to manage your emotional concerns, mental health concerns? Make sure that you are emotionally healthy and well in order to be able to help our students better. So that is not provided directly by us, but it is something that we can help set up if there are groups of parents or school staff or KDE employees that want to have that training. We can help arrange that for you. Okay. Next. Positive behavior interventions and supports and interconnected systems framework is a big chunk of what we offer through our school climate transformation project and our AWARE project. And this one is, again, another tier 1 intervention for our 3-tiered system of support, the multi-tier system. Both Olvea's bullying program and positive behavior interventions are a tier 1 support to help with discipline. Because if our kids are being disciplined, they're taken out of the classroom, and so they're not learning. So we don't want that to happen. Using this framework helps keep kids in the classroom, and it's more about changing the behavior of the adult. So if you don't see the behavior of a student as something that needs to be punished, more instead you see it as something that could be a reaction to trauma or something that's going on at home or a number of things, then this particular program helps you do that. Along with looking at rewards for good behavior, ignoring some negative behaviors. There are classroom management strategies that help teachers manage behavior within the classroom instead of pulling them out. So we want to reduce office referrals and things like suspensions or even out of school expulsions. Next. Okay, so youth mental health first aid, I'm going to take a little more time to talk about, because this is one that we've spent a lot of effort on, and I think we need to continue to spend a lot of effort on, because everything else that we've talked about in some way or another impacts the mental health of adults and kids, or there's a connection between all of these initiatives and interventions. So with youth mental health first aid, what you learn is how to put an emotional Band-Aid on a child who might be in a crisis. It's very similar to physical CPR first aid. You're not the doctor. If you come up on somebody who's in need of help, you're going to provide whatever help you can. But that's only until somebody who's more qualified can get there and take over and provide the treatment to this child. So that's what you do with youth mental health first aid. We're not learning to diagnose or treat mental illness. We're just learning to watch for signs and symptoms of what could be a mental health crisis, or at the very least in a developing mental health problem, so that you can get these children to the professionals that they need and not wait until something as serious as attempted suicide or a completed suicide would occur. Next. Okay. This program is free. All of the trainings that we offer to you are free. They don't cost anybody anything. But this one is a little bit longer than some of them. This is a 6-hour course that teaches you how to identify, understand, and respond to addiction and mental illness signs and symptoms. And at the present time, we have the ability to teach it virtually. So it has been dropped to a 4.5-hour virtual course, provided there's some pre-work done by the participants that takes up the first 2 hours. So you can do part of the work on your own schedule at home, take as much time as you want, and then you spend 4 hours with trainers who can walk you through the rest of this. Looking at risk factors and warning signs, I think a lot of times people think that kids don't really have mental health problems, but they do. And kids from, as early as 10, 11, 12 can start showing signs of anxiety and depression these days. So it's really something we need to look at. This training was meant to be done in person, but since we've been in a pandemic and everybody's been at home, the National Council has developed a way for us to teach it virtually, which is not quite as effective as being in the same room with people where you can talk and interact, but at least it's getting done. And you can do a combination of a blended training. We can have groups as small as 5 or as large as 30, but if you have 30, then we need 2 trainers and a third person to make sure that if you have a trauma reaction to something that we're discussing, that there's another person who can step out into the hallway with you and make sure you're okay. Next. What you're going to learn in this training is risk factors and warning signs of mental health and substance use problems, and information on depression, anxiety, trauma, psychosis, and substance abuse. And again, those problems start as young as 10, 11, 12, and all of them can be recurring. But the good news is that if you experience a mental health crisis, you can return to a pre-crisis state of functioning fairly quickly if you have the right support systems and professionals in place. So part of the way you learn to do that in this program is a 5-step plan. It's referred to as ALGE. So you learn to assess the situation to see what positives and negatives you have, to see what you think is going on, ask questions and listen, because sometimes listening is one of the hardest things we can do. As adults, sometimes we want to jump in and fix the problem, but this helps you learn to listen and be non-judgmental with your listening to whatever the child is telling you. And then giving reassurance, giving information, and encouraging self-help and encouraging professional help. Sometimes self-help can work. Mindfulness can be a way to address self-help. The resiliency strategies for educators is good self-help for adults, but for kids, sometimes that's not enough. So we need professionals to help engage that child. And peer resources sometimes too, which goes back to your sources of strength, looking at peer groups to help children figure out what their strength is and how they can engage in self-help through using those skills. Next. Okay. So you probably already know this, and we've talked about it some, but mental health problems are pretty common, and they develop during adolescence, and half of all lifetime cases of mental illness begin by the age of 14, and 3/4 of them by age of 24. And for many of them, it's chronic. For some, it's just recurring. For some, you might have a crisis early on, you get it dealt with by the proper professionals, and then it doesn't come back, and that's okay too. Young people can experience their mental health problems differently, and sometimes it's hard to know that. If you take say a 16-year-old who suddenly becomes withdrawn, likes to sleep a lot, it doesn't want to do homework, doesn't want to shower, doesn't want to eat, some of that is not atypical for adolescents, but sometimes it's a sign of a deeper problem. So just learning those signs and symptoms and ways to ask and find out, is this normal for adolescents, or is there something else going on? Stigma is associated with mental health problems even today. The more that we talk about it and tell ourselves that it's okay to have a mental health crisis, it's okay to not be mentally well today in this moment, we still have a problem in our society with feeling like it isn't okay, especially when it's about ourselves. So trying really hard to reduce that stigma so that people are willing to get help is part of the training. And we know the sooner you get help, the more likely you are to have a positive outcome. Next. Okay, so that was short and sweet, but those are all the training sessions that we can offer. The Youth Mental Health First Aid is available to parents, to community groups, faith-based communities, pretty much any adult that want to learn how to have a better understanding of the mental health problems that kids might face and how to deal with it. That one in the Olvea's Bullying Prevention Program, we can provide directly out of our division. The Sources of Strength, Kathy Prothero at the Kentucky Cabinet for Health and Family Services is the contact person for that, and now another lady named Sheila Barnard. So if you need her name, I can get that for you. And we have a training coordinator named Regina Dawson who can help schedule some of these other trainings if you're interested in doing those. And again, all of them are intertwined. They all relate to each other. They are all very effective trainings, and we are ready and eager to provide any of those training sessions to any of you who might be interested. And thank you.
I didn't saw the question in the chat box.
There was a question?
Do you think this program could be used pretty much for everyone coming back into school after such a long time away?
And I'm assuming we're talking about Youth Mental Health First Aid or a different one?
Judith, you want to answer that?
Yes, sorry. That's what I was referring to, the youth program. Although I think everybody could benefit, but yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think schools need to really look closely at trying to have that training before their students come back, because none of us have lived through this type of pandemic before. And so when kids re-enter school, they're going to have emotional problems. It's going to be very different. I mean, you've got kindergartners who've never been to school before, but then you have other kids who've been out of school for a year. And while it took them months to get used to engaging in education in a virtual environment, it's going to have the same types of readjustment when they go back. And adults are going to have to readjust. So, yep.
If I could just, because I know that the trainings that we're able to set them up with you all, is there a way maybe to take it a step further? And again, I'm just throwing this out there to where there would be the opportunity that you all could provide to various agencies, like Kentucky SPIA and KPFC, and KPFC may already have some of these. I'm just using an example because the way to get this widespread and so that families have this critical information is by utilizing the people that are already out there training them. And this way you will ensure that you have the people in place that are already there, and you're going to be able to reach many more families. So I could see where on all of these trainings that you listed, if there would be that opportunity. And two, if you're utilizing the organizations that already exist and are already doing training through their programs, you're not relying on continued funding to continue this important mission initiative of this, because these things are going to be critical no matter what you're going through, but especially more so now and as we're all coming back. And for our students, that COVID in itself is trauma, but those who may have experienced more trauma due to the situation that they may be living in, or prior trauma to it. So any of those opportunities that we could take advantage of, I see where it would help a great deal.
Mm-hmm. Agreed. And we have an extensive network of trainers that we've already trained. It wouldn't, a lot of this training wouldn't necessarily be delivered by the people in our division, but we've provided training to trainers who can go out and do that. And we have partnerships with, I think I already mentioned, the Center for Trauma and Children at UK, Human Development Institute. The Division of Student Success has contracted with Creed and Roger Cleveland for several years to help us make sure that our trainings are culturally responsive. We have collaborations with the Office of Friskies, Behavioral Health, the Pritchard Committee, Student Voice, and most of us are active participants of the State Interagency Council. So, and some of our regional co-ops have gone through our training network, so now they're out training people in all of these various trainings as well. So there's a huge network out there. There's a lot of us available to training, and you can have any or all that we've talked about based on your needs and where you're at.
And would there be opportunity that if we have staff, that it would be beneficial so that they could receive the trainers too? Are there those opportunities available?
There are. Usually there's an expense related to train the trainers. Sources of Strength and Olvea's prevention program train their own trainers. So there's a fee for that. Our division, through the AWARE project, trained 14 new youth mental health first aid trainers a little over a year ago through their grant. So that's sometimes an opportunity. It just depends on funding. The actual training that we provide, of course, as I said, is no charge. It's free to you, but becoming a trainer sometimes takes a little bit of money.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Are there any other questions? I feel like I went through that kind of fast because I didn't want to run out of time, but I'm certainly willing to answer any other questions, or if you want to email or call, we can have another conversation at another time.
Well, great. Thanks, Deborah, for the presentation, and thanks for engaging with the questions that folks came up with. I think at this point in our agenda, we wanted to take a little time to talk about how the topics for this group were set, and just have a check-in on that. So we can have, I think Leslie is on. Leslie, could you come on and talk about how the agenda and topics are set for this group? And then we can have a discussion about, is that working for us, or do we want to try something else?
Definitely. the last meeting in December, at the end of the presentations, Megan sends out an exit slip in the meeting chat for you to go in and talk about the meeting, and also to share anything that you would like to learn a little bit more about. And she will do that again today. But all of our topics today were based on the information that we got from your exit slips in December. So Megan is posting that right now. And again, you can put down whatever you would like to hear for the next meeting. If this meeting has been, there's several questions on there. It's a pretty quick exit slip, but you sure do help us out when we're planning on the.
So you got a little bit of a tough connection, Leslie, but we did hear that the exit slip is the way that information is collected on how this meeting went, as well as information around the next meeting. And Megan has posted in the chat the exit slip for this meeting, so you have a chance to provide feedback on it, and then also ask or have input on what topics will be coming forward. So let's take a minute and if everyone wants to click on that exit slip and go through that, and then let's take a couple of minutes and do that. Then I'd like us to get back together and just talk about how this meeting is working for us, how that exit slip process of providing feedback on the meeting and setting the agenda is working for us. But just so everybody's got that fresh experience, let's go ahead and take the exit slip. Click on that link to the right and go ahead and complete that. Great. And Leslie, do you have control over the Google form that's collecting that information?
No, that would be me, Megan.
Actually, that'd be Megan.
Okay. Megan, can you see that data coming in?
Commissioner, this is Judith. I don't know about others, but I still need a minute or two to complete to complete the form.
Thank you.
Yes, I haven't gotten any responses yet.
Great. Thank you, Carol. I have my co-host, Sunny, has joined me here. That's her chair over there. So we'll see what her opinion is on things a little later.
Well, I think you got the best, most important input there.
All right, well, great. We'll take about one more minute and then we'll come back together and chat some more. About 10 more seconds. Okay, great. So hopefully several of you had the chance to see the exit slip or to complete it. So we appreciate that information. But let's just have a dialogue about how the meeting today went as far as structure. Is there something that we want to do differently with these meetings? How the exit slip is working as far as setting agendas going forward. And I think from my perspective, just to get us started, I thought the content was great. It was timely. You know, the topics that we had to talk about today. I'd love for us to think about how we could do more to make it interactive with all of you. So some things where we could encourage getting your input and having some of you come on, unmute, speak, type things in the chat, and challenge our presenters going forward to think about how we can involve our advisories more. You have seen that through the exit slip, that's the way that the staff determines what you're interested in and then sets the agenda. But just to Judith's point from the email she sent out earlier today, we can always add more items if there's something that comes up that's really timely that people want to talk about. So we could think about what's a way to do that. Maybe email is the way that we can go about that. Just send an email in advance of the meeting. So depending on what it is, we may or may not be able to pull together staff to talk about it, but we can always dialogue it. So we have one comment here from Lisa. Please make sure you send out the mental health presentation and the diversity, equity, inclusion presentations. They were great. Thank you, Lisa. We will be sure and do that. And I know we've got Megan and Leslie on here. Brooke likes the idea of working in these meetings as well as receiving important updates. I think that, Brooke, that's that notion of how can we, involve a greater dialogue in these. And I see, Judith, you have your hand up, so let's go ahead and recognize you, Judith.
Thank you, Commissioner. First of all, thank you also for asking the question. And yeah, that was my main request, was just in the moment, sometimes things come up. Obviously, one of the things I had hoped to talk about was the COVID guidance, but you've just had to reissue it because things have changed. So no point in really talking about that in the moment. My overall question / feedback would be, I also echo your desire to have it be more two-way. I would love to hear what it is that you would like to get out of the sessions. And I also further propose that we might consider changing the name from parents to families, because I don't remember the definition. I'm not sure if it was Leslie or someone else referred to the technical definition of parent that's being used in one of the regulations and many, but I know that we have a lot of folks who are actually maybe guardians or grandparents, and so maybe broadening that might be a consideration. And what is the time frame for feedback on the SBDM thing would be helpful. Maybe even sending out some of this stuff in advance, shortening the presentations so that if we have a chance to look at it. And finally, sorry, this is a lot, but if this is really a committee or a council, maybe it ought to have some kind of structure in terms of, I mean, I don't personally have the need to be very formal with bylaws, but perhaps we could support the staff better so that not everything's left to staff to prepare an agenda. In other words, there are a lot of tools out there for people to communicate, like Slack, and there's just so many tools. So, I'm the person who, okay, if you come up with the idea, here you go, Judith, your turn. But I would be happy to help, and I'm sure there are others as well. It should be a two-way street. We want it to be.
Yeah, thanks, Judith. So looks like Kelly's posted the answer to your question on the SBDM feedback in the chat, and thanks for the suggestions on structure. I mean, really, there aren't any rules or limitations on how this group has to be structured and operate. It has operated where you've got some of the KDE staff with Leslie and Megan, mostly that have been on to prepare or get the meeting ready for you. to line up the staff who are going to do the presentations. The staff has done the research, put all that together, and then they come on and spend that time with you. But I think what we've heard today is that, you know, the content again was great, but some thought into how we can make it more interactive. And so, Judith, I think adding to the question that you asked, or responding to the question that you asked, what would I like to see out of this? I always like advisories where I'm not, and the staff's not advising you. The purpose of the group is for you to advise us. So for us to bring you key questions, things that we're wrestling with and struggling with, and get your feedback and input on that, and things that you want to talk about. So I think there are some good things in place in that you have the ability to set the agenda through that feedback form. With the length of time between our meetings, there's a lot that can happen between the next time we get together. So that may be something that we want to allow for sort of more up-to-date changes to the agenda, and think about how we can intentionally structure conversations where you're doing some learning, because as I think you've heard today, there's a lot of technical stuff going on, a lot of energy going on around things like equity and this SBDM work and the mental health and school safety resources that were shared. A lot of activity happening. So you having that information is of value, but then also getting feedback from you on what do you think of this? How could this be better? What are some places where we're missing, or what are some things that really activated for you and you thought, wow, this is really great, and I want to acknowledge that. So that's what I'd like to see, is it be more two-way. My opinion is that allowing you to set the agenda through the feedback form is a great mechanism. If we can add that late addition to email, that would work great. And then the challenge for us as staff members going forward is thinking about how we can structure this where there's a greater dialogue. Thomas, I see that you've come on. Oops, muted. There you go.
Yes, I just want to reiterate the points that you made before I even put them in the chat box. Again, just we want to, when the commissioner asked me to come on, we want to make sure that we're serving your needs and giving you the information that you need going forward to share with your communities and with your families. And also, if there's any educational, techno jargon that you all need me or any of the presenters to explain, just please stop us and ask us to explain it. Thanks, Commissioner.
Thanks, Thomas. Rhonda's got a great suggestion here. You know, just one of the things that we haven't really done with this group is get to know each other. We've had a couple of meetings together. I think this is the second meeting that I've had with you since I've come to Kentucky as commissioner. I think it would be good for us to develop deeper relationships with each other. That's, I know, difficult to do under these circumstances where we're meeting electronically, but there are ways to do that too, and we could take the time to do that so that it's not just all content focused in terms of here are some topics we're going to hear presentations on, here's things that we're going to receive information on, but also how we can think about knowing each other's people, where we're coming from, and develop that personal connection. I think would be a good thing for us to weave in to next time. A couple of other points that have come in. State testing window. I'm going to put resources around testing in the chat, just in response to that question and in the interest of time. And also, let's see here. Judith's got another question here in the COVID guidance, child fine not addressed. How will it be addressed? The latest COVID package. I don't know that we'll have time to get into all three of these big questions. Especially the $2.6 billion in the latest COVID package is a lot. There's a lot to get into that. So we'll have to work on that. Maybe for our next meeting, we can get into some detail on those things. Thanks, everybody. I know that we're running short on time right now. I really appreciated the conversation. Thank you to the presenters who put in so much time pulling together all of these resources so that we were informed. I think we've got some ideas for next time around, doing some getting to know you activities, thinking about how we can create more opportunities for interaction and dialogue going forward. And we've got a couple of suggestions on topics to cover for next time as well. If there's anything we didn't get to, questions that you had following up, please feel free to reach out to us. And we will support you with those. And I think you've got some more information coming. Thanks so much, everybody. We appreciated the chance to be with you this afternoon.